I'm Wilson Leach, co-founder and current CEO of AIN, Aviation International News. I'm extremely honored to have been asked to make this introduction to the commemorative 40th anniversary video for IBAC. IBAC is a tremendous organization that has done great things internationally for business aviation. Coincidentally, AIN is celebrating its 50th year on the exact same date. That's right, 10 years before IBAC was founded, we founded AIN. The beauty of what we have is a treasure trove of back copies, so it's always fun to turn the hands of time back and go see exactly what was happening at that time. So you can see this is our 10th year anniversary of NBAA Convention News. September 15 was day one of the Anaheim Convention. And oh, by the way, guess what? IBAC front page. This is a full front page story. Coincidentally, I don't think IBAC knew what this was going to happen, but this was our coverage exactly 40 years ago. And that jumped to page 2, and all the officers of IBAC are prominent. God bless Alan Paulson, okay? And the Learfan was news in 1981, and the EFIS was just being introduced. Another big part of 1981 is there was a huge ATC strike going on, and that was in the news along with avionics and everything else. And then day 3, there was a record attendance of the 81 NBAA, EJA, and again, all the news that's fit to print. So we were thrilled to be able to give IBAC the coverage it deserved. So there you have it, exactly what was going on in September 1981 when IBAC was founded, 40 years ago. Congratulations, IBAC, and we wish you 40 more great years ahead. Thank you very much.
I truly want to thank all of those that have been involved in making IBAC a success. It was not an easy process for any of those involved, and they all applied themselves over the years. Congratulations on your 40th anniversary. It's a well-deserved time. And in the beginning, I think you may have seen it in my notes, we were supposed to pass the administration around from one association to another. And NBAA raised its hand and said, we'll take it. The next thing I know, John Wynant had raised my hand and said, yeah, that's you. And after that, it was supposed to go to CBAA, and they said they really had limits as to what they were capable of doing, and they were going to have to demur. So we looked around at the other members. There was a European member, which I think at that time was still the Netherlands Association. And they were a one-man operation. And so they demurred. The English one was the Business Aircraft Users Association. And ultimately, they did end up being the ones that took it after, let's see, I think I ended up with it for 6 years on my desk. And the Brits did take it. Derek Leggett was essentially their only employee and their executive officer. And he, like myself, came in out of the industry. Came back to us being NBAA, I'm sorry. And it was after that that we started finding people who this would be what they would do. So as opposed to a secondary thing or an employee of one of the associations, and it would be paid for by IBAC. And we really came together under Kurt. He had the knowledge and the personality and the style that brought it together. And it's done well under him. There is no question. Another thing that probably was helpful was when they set up the safety programs, which actually gave a product that members of the associations could join. The Asian Association, the Middle Eastern Association, I guess it's Middle Eastern and North Africa. It's always been a case of trying to bring things properly together. Even the one in the UK, BAUA, Business Aircraft Users Association, actually disappeared completely. And they were subsumed into a group that was made up of aircraft manufacturers. And I think they still are a subset of that at this point. So there's been a lot of flexing, CBAA, NBAA, EBAA have been probably the firm background for what it has become over the last 15, 20 years. It was, okay, Steve Stevenson was the one that actually called the meetings. And in fact, when you see the pictures of the storefront, that's where PAUA was. He actually had been a World War II fighter pilot. If you ever met the man, you couldn't see a fighter pilot in him if you prayed. But nonetheless, that's what he did. That was his background. And in his case, his wife did all of the administrative work within BAUA. And he was the one that got hold of Wynant and basically organized those first couple of meetings. Now, as I said, I was not party to those meetings. I can't pretend to be outside of what John told me and the pictures that he, thank God, someone took. IBAC was able to make that argument because it wasn't just somebody running to Northwest Ohio. That was about the time that the first turbine aircraft were beginning to be able to make the flights across the north. I can remember aviation author who was absolutely flabbergasted that one of these aircraft had reached $1 million, and how could they? And don't get me wrong, he was an advocate for it, but he was based in White Plains as a writer, and he didn't think they'd ever be able to take the price of these aircraft any higher and still be able to justify their expense. And what they found is they could. They found that it allowed them to get their people where they needed to be when they needed to be there. So it was validating the use, quite frankly. Ed Storr, nice gentleman, knew the business. He had been a VP for international ops at, I think it was United. And so he knew what the heck he was talking about. He had seen the politics from being at ICAO.
was very privileged to spend about 20 some years working with IBAC, and I'm certainly honoured to have the opportunity to convey a few greetings and good wishes to the many colleagues, both in the IBAC member associations and amongst the operators that I worked with throughout those 20 years. And with a span of 20 years, of course, I not only have this chance to be involved in the 40th anniversary of the founding of IBAC, but I was around at the time of the 20th anniversary of the founding of IBAC. And and this was a very, very rewarding and very professionally satisfying period of my 50 some years in the aviation business. The thing that impressed me was that all of the people that I encountered at the beginning and subsequently 20 years in IBAC were people with a great passion for aviation, with a passion for aviation safety, and a commitment to doing the first-class professional job. And this was what really made this such an enjoyable period of my professional career. Father of the safety management systems in that sense was Professor James Reeson of the United Kingdom, and he had been involved in investigating several fatal accidents in the maritime area, and had reached some very, very, very interesting conclusions, and conclusions which could, with some adaptation, be applied to aviation and specifically to aircraft operators. This took root in IBAC and became the cornerstone of an undertaking which we call the ISBAO, International Standard for Business Aircraft Operations. The SMS was to be scalable so that it could cater to the range and diversity of size and complexity of an operator. And secondly, that this ISBAO could be audited, and it would be necessary for IBAC to train and accredit auditors who the operator would engage to establish whether or not the documentation, reporting, analysis, etc., that was being conducted by the operator as set down in the ISBAO was fully compliant. Set in motion, probably I would say, almost a pioneering effort by the business aviation community to introduce safety management systems. The people from various parts of the world, different cultures, and so on, intermingling, collaborating on things of common interest. And through this, naturally, some bonding occurred, friendships. There were regular meetings so the friendships could be nurtured. And many of those friendships, 20 years on, endure to this day. And I think this is a very rewarding byproduct of the work we do. I must say, as I said at the outset, I feel very, very privileged to have had the opportunity to work for IBAC. And I mention again my dear friend Bill Stein of NBAA. Bill and I get together and have a chat on the phone every month or so, and we haven't managed to see one another for a couple of years thanks to this pandemic, but there is talk already of when and where a small group of us will reconvene when the pandemic subsides to the point where we're able to travel again.
it's a great pleasure for me to be wishing IBAC a happy 40th anniversary. It's a great milestone. And I'd especially like to thank all of those people over the 40 years who have contributed to the representation of the business aviation community in the making of rules and regulations and sustainable activities on behalf of business aviation. There's a tremendous amount of work, and everybody should be very happy for what they have done for the business aviation community over the 40-year history. Yeah. Okay. I guess of all of the things that I remember, or I think were most significant over the years that I spent at IBAC, the development of an international code of best practice was the most significant. You know, since I had a regulatory background, it was very obvious to me through the 90s that aviation was growing too quick for the regulatory environment. It was virtually impossible for regulators around the world to continue to provide oversight of the aviation industry through historical methods. The very precise rulemaking just wasn't going to work anymore. There just wasn't the ability to have the inspection capability of the past. So we looked at what the industry, what the community as a whole, the business community as a whole was doing with international standardization, such as the ISO, the final result. And the ISBAO, of course, was one of the leading aviation standards ever developed. It was built around the safety management system, which also was a very, very new concept for the regulatory environment. But the SMS within the ISBAO resulted in the confidence of the International Civil Aviation Organization for the implementation of ISBAO into the regulatory process. We ended up having a very significant endorsement by the president of ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, who wrote to us and basically commended IBAC on having developed an international standard of such quality. And he made a point of coming to an IBAC, a large IBAC meeting, and briefing us on how happy ICAO was to see the industry stepping forward and using the initiative to develop the ISBAO. So this, of course, led to a lot of changes within the regulatory regime within ICAO, within Europe and other countries. And so all in all, the ISBAO was probably one of the most significant things that I felt that IBAC was involved with in the years that I was there. Basically, what happened was when it came time to making the changes to the international regulatory standards at ICAO, the council and the Air Navigation Commission, the two bodies within ICAO that were involved in the development of new rulemaking, i.e. the ICAO standards, they approached IBAC and said, look, you guys have the knowledge and capability. You have an international standard that is now recognized. We would like you to form a committee and develop the regulations for us. So we did that. So in essence, the confidence of the ISBAO and the SMS led to the International Civil Aviation Organization, a United Nations specialized agency, to ask the industry, IBAC, to develop the rules for them. So the ISBAO led to very positive results in developing rulemaking for the future, not only with ICAO, but the next step after that was with the European Agency for Aviation, the EASA, they eventually turned to IBAC and said, "Can you help us with a JAR Ops 2?" JAR Ops 2 being the regulation that was being developed for private or corporate aviation. So in essence, we ended up leading that exercise as well. So a very positive result, all stemming from the concept of adhering to a good international standard. So the concept of using international best practices has basically become extremely important throughout the aviation industry as a whole. So we're very happy to have been quick off the mark in developing an SMS-based best practice, which was the ISBAO. My experience wasn't quite like Bill's. I have, of course, an aviation background. Before IBAC, I was a regulator with Transport Canada Civil Aviation, and when I retired, I started my own business aviation company. And then approximately, maybe 6 months afterwards, I was approached by the Canadian Business Aircraft Association asking me to put my name in for the Director General of IBAC. And at that time, of course, my background was in aviation as a whole. I spent some time in the air navigation system management, and my background as a pilot, so I did a lot of research flying, that kind of thing. So the approach by the Canadian Business Aircraft Association was a bit off the wall. It's not something I was looking at, but when I started discussing it with them, it looked pretty good. So they had a competition coming up. I threw my hat in the ring, and the result was I was appointed. A lot of this stuff was initially developed starting in the 1940s and added piecemeal to it over the years. So the Annex 6 Part 2, which dealt with the private sector, really wasn't reflective of modern aviation. And of course, the growth of business aviation, the type of aircraft that were being flown, the transcontinental, the transoceanic, international nature of the flying became such that Annex 6 Part 2 was entirely inappropriate to the type of operations. So the International Civil Aviation Organization approached us basically saying that, you people have the expertise that we don't have. We have considerable confidence in you, given the ISBAO and the fact that the president of the council and the council itself has endorsed the ISBAO. Said, would you consider doing or leading a group to develop a completely revised Annex 6 Part 2 for primarily for corporate aviation, although we did break the Annex 6 Part 2 down into 3 parts. One for larger commercial type of operations, one for corporate, and one for pilot flown general aviation type of aircraft. And so that third part, the owners and pilots changes and work, we ended up approaching it from a different angle. Initially back when early around 2000, 1999, 2000, 2001, we did lobby the International Civil Aviation Organization to be involved, to have status within the Environmental Committee on Aviation Environmental Protection, CAPE. That was basically the body that set all the environmental rules. So the president did agree to our involvement. We did get plugged in. At that time, though, we were primarily more interested in the changes being made on the noise rules. That was starting to impact business aviation quite considerably. So we got involved at that time primarily because of changes there. However, it was not long before the issue of climate change started rearing its I shouldn't say ugly head, but the ICAO environment with the Committee on Aviation Environmental Protection. We helped work on the considerable amount of activity that they were putting to develop standards for emissions, and so that work led to some very serious changes within the aviation community. A very significant number of initiatives that were ongoing by companies around the world, the manufacturers of aircraft, the manufacturer of engines, the operational procedures being put in place by the airlines, the operational procedures being put in place by the business aviation operators. So a lot of things were going on. So the involvement by IBAC at this time was primarily in participation within the Cape and educating the Cape members, who are basically environmental aviation people from around the world. We had to help them understand the demands of business aviation, what business aviation were doing, etc. That all led to a number of different initiatives. But the one for us was developing that concept of business aviation and the environment that you are referring to. So we ended up, when I say the business aviation operator community, started working with the manufacturing industry, primarily in the US, to develop that environmental document that basically was the plan for business aviation and introduction of emission standards. I think more than anything else, I just feel that we need to thank the very significant number of people that were involved throughout the history of IBAC. When I look at the number of people within the aviation community that we had involved in our programs, I sometimes am astounded to think of all of the names of people we are involved with. The task forces, the task groups, the committees that were working, the business aviation companies themselves. And I have to admit that, whenever we go out to a flight department somewhere and say, look, we need some help because we don't have the expertise in this particular subject, and we think you have the guy to do it or the gal to do it. And it's almost inevitably, they would say, yes, absolutely, we will agree to it. And I'm sure the individuals will agree to it when we ask them. So if I look through all of the names of the people that have contributed over the years, it is quite exhaustive. Because the IBAC as a secretariat is actually very small. We're talking of 3 or 4 or 5 people that are trying to run the programs, but we can't be represented at all of the things that are going on ourselves. So it needed to be done by the community as a whole. So there's a very significant number of people that have been involved, and I think the hats should be taken off to all of those people that contributed over the years.
Well, congratulations, IBAC, on your 40th anniversary, and especially to the IBAC member associations, members of the governing board, Planning and Operations Committee, and the Secretariat, plus all of those people who support IBAC activities through its many committees and associated functions. You all can be very proud of what the organization has accomplished in the past 40 years. The business aviation community has immensely profited by your efforts. We went to Hartford and met with the United Technologies, and they took us through their operation and spent a couple of days with us showing us how the ISO 9000 worked for them. They were a fairly large flight department, 5 aircraft and a couple of helicopters, 5 fixed-wing aircraft and a couple of helicopters. Once we looked at what they were doing, it was complexity and the degree of work that was required to develop all of their policies, their metrics that they were using, and then track them. We decided that no, that might work for them, but for a flight department with 1 aircraft, 2 pilots, and maybe an engineer, they just would be overkill. So we stepped back, and we liked some of the ideas from the ISO 9000, but we had to have something much simpler. One of the principles we were working with was that anything we did, the standards should be applicable and usable by any size of flight department in any country of the world. Safety management systems at that point were used mostly in complex industries, but Shell Aviation in their flight department in Rotterdam had developed a type of safety management system, which they called a safety case. And we thought, we might be able to make this work by using that, which would require the operators to assess the hazards and the associated risks in their operation, develop mitigation to either eliminate the hazard or manage the risk to an acceptable level, which they would have to define as what their acceptable level of risk was, then track the mitigation to ensure that it was appropriate and effective. And so that even a small flight department could do that in a very scaled way. Everybody agreed that that was a step forward. Now, us in the steering committee were feeling a bit like the dog that chased the car and caught it. What are we going to do with it now? Entergy was one of those. Mert Pellegrin from Entergy was one of the people that attended that workshop. Mert had our standard before, and he had started work on it, so he had a leg up. And between September and the end of the year, he managed to pull together all of the policies and procedures required, put it in an operations manual, and pass an audit. And so they were the first operator in the US to complete an ISBO registration audit. And when that happened, Bob Bluin and Mert had a little discussion, and he said, hey, we want to make a bit of an event from this, and could the IBAC guys come down and present the certificate to the registration certificate to Entergy. So we agreed, and Don Spruceton and I and Bob Bluin went to New Orleans, and Mert took us downtown to their head office in New Orleans, and we went into the conference room, and in come the CEO, and we presented the certificate to Mert and the CEO, and everything was fine. We were all happy, and the CEO then took the podium and said that he wanted to welcome Mert and the flight department they were now full-fledged members of the organization because they as well had a safety management system, and all of the rest of the elements of the company had already had a safety management system. So they were now full-fledged members. And I thought that was pretty telling, that the CEO of a large energy utility like Energy, he was down and understood the implications and what we were trying to do and how that was going to affect their total operation. Operators for quite some time who saw this as a huge paper exercise that they were going to, they didn't want any part of that. But most of the operators, the very, very high percentage of them, once they got into it, they realized it was a little bit of work, but it all made sense. And one of the things that we found that really opened the eyes of a lot of the people was that when you went into a flight department and talked to people and say, what are you here for? You'd get answers like, oh, our senior management want this airplane here so that they can get to a meeting when they want to. They won't have to rely on the airlines, and we'll get them there for sure. And you go in and ask the CEO, why do you have this corporate flight department? Because I want to get their safety safely. I want to, safety is paramount to our organization. And I don't want senior people riding on an airline which will be pushing weather to get into a place for commercial purposes instead of turning around and going back when they should. Hold it. There's a huge dichotomy between what the people think and what management thinks, because they hadn't been having dialogue. And once you got with the ISBO and the safety management system, one of the first steps was to develop a safety policy which identified an acceptable level of risk. And so that required the flight department manager and the CEO of the company, senior management team, to sit down and talk. And I get feedback from the flight department manager saying, that was a very interesting conversation. We learned things and they learned things that we all thought each other knew. When we were developing the ISBO, we spent some time with the people in Shell Flight Department, and they showed us their safety case, as they called it, which was a rudimentary safety management system. And that really convinced us that this was doable, because up until then, it was only large organizations that had safety management systems. And Terry Kelly did a lot of work for us in breaking it down to the basic elements. Raised a lot of questions. So in 2007, we decided to develop some more guidance material for the safety management system development and implementation. And that was an interesting project again, where we involved a lot of the flight departments that had safety management systems and said, okay, what's been working for you and what more do you need? And so we developed the SMS guidance material and the toolkit. And that went over, that was very popular. We developed workshops to go along with it, and the operators that had been struggling found that, yeah, okay, here's an easier solution, and a way to do what we need to do to make sure that we keep things appropriate and effective.
Thank you for having me. It's a great opportunity for the ABAA to wish the IBAC people all the very best on the 40th anniversary of IBAC, a great worldwide organization for business aviation. All the best. Also, the membership of IBAC gives us a much greater voice with our local agencies, the government agencies, such as the Civil Aviation Safety Authority and Air Services Australia, who provide air traffic control services throughout Australia. Those agencies know that the ABAA is part of a worldwide organisation, IBAC, and that gives us added strength when discussing matters with them. Attendance at the IBAC meetings throughout the world has been a wonderful experience for me, and I've been able to pass on to our members the thoughts of business aviation operators around the world, which really helps us being so far away from the USA and Europe and Canada and South America, etc. So I can bring back very positive messages following those meetings. A few years ago at a IBAC board meeting in Montreal, I had the opportunity to meet many representatives at ICAO, country state representatives at ICAO, which really broadened my horizons, and I was able to pass on a positive message to our members. And are registered as ISBAH operators. So those two safety standards have been very worthwhile, and many of our members have taken them up and have passed their audits and continue to do so. And we're able to get that message across to our government agencies as well. And that strengthens our relationship with those public servants, which is very important. And also in 2014, with the introduction of ISBAH, the handling safety standard for business aviation, that was recognised by many of our associate members who operate FBA. With ISBAO, we've got the best safety standards in the world.
Parabéns, feliz aniversário, IBAC, pelos seus 40 anos de vida. Parabéns. Happy anniversary, IBAC, for the 4th anniversary. Congratulations. Thanks to be with you, our good friends. One thing that I want to mention on this special event is how much IBAC was supportive to ABAG to start the LabAce with NBAA and partnership and start that show here in South America. That was a challenging time, but it was a very successful since the first event that we had, first show. And nowadays we have the second or the third biggest business aviation show in the world. And thanks to IBAC for the support, instructions, and being so instrumental to us and to our business aviation market in Brazil. So there's another thing that has been very helpful to our market here is the ASBEO and ASBA that was developed by IBAC. Brazil is a big need for instructions, for regulations, and 15 years ago we had a big change from the military to the civilians managing our civil aviation in Brazil, and having a support like ISBEO and ISBA that was very helpful on the general and the business aviation side, where we can spread the word through the market and show them the importance of having such certification and use that as their commitment to the safety side of the operation. So the importance of the ISBEO and the ISBA for our future is regarding the eVTOL programs. Here in Brazil, we have Embraer, which EVE program, which is being very successful. I'm part of the board of this program. looking very careful what's going on and what is the future shows, and the importance on having such kind of a certification will be the base for this operation of the eVTOL for the future. So then I come back for 1 year as a vice chairman, and naturally by the process, I become chairman again and past chairman again. And I think I'm the only case in the history of IBAC that I was two-time chairman and two-time past chairman and two-time vice chairman in the process, because we always try to give that opportunity to some other countries to do this. And so I had the opportunity to work with Don, with Kurt. I was fully involved in the process of hiring Kurt, and I'm very happy to be part of this group. Very interesting group, and I'm very honored to be part of that.
Well, congratulations to IBAC on the 40th anniversary of the organization. From the Canadian Business Aviation Association, it's a pleasure to be able to participate in this anniversary celebration, and I'm glad to be a part of the governing board on behalf of the Canadian Business Aviation Association. And so it's been my pleasure to be involved for quite some time, and then a number of years later, well, I guess at the beginning of the ISBAO, we had an audit cycle, and I ended up more by accident than anything else, because I asked how many ISBAO operators had been registered, and they said, oh, we have 16. And I thought, great, I won't be the first, but it turned out what they meant was they had 16 auditors. So when I made a phone call, I think I had 16 return phone calls in about 10 minutes asking if they could be the first auditor to do an ISBAO audit. So by accident, we ended up being the very first ISBAO registrant, because we were a small, simple flight department, 1 airplane, 4 crew or 4 people, a maintenance person and 3 staff pilots. And so it was an honor to be part of that. We were then involved with the Standards Committee for years, and then later I became the Canadian representative to the IBAC governing board, replacing Len Giacomelli, who had stepped down after years of excellent service there. The ISBAO came at the right time for our industry. It was particularly a hunger for the American and European operators. There was some pressure to have some standards that would be mutually recognized. Of course, we continue with that effort globally to find people, find acceptance and to gain it for the industry. But at the time, there was a need for us to move past the idea of regulating to safety. We'd long hit the sort of maximum effect of regulation where safety wasn't going to get any better or not maximally better. We were going to see minor improvements in safety with regulation, but we needed a new concept. And the idea of safety management systems really forwarded through Ray Rohr and Don Spruceton, with the brilliant work of a fellow named Terry Kelly, who sort of took these industrial concepts and wrapped his mind around how to develop those for aviation. Things that we accept today as normal in our industry, Terry developed walking around his living room many years ago. And so that enabled us then to go from prescription and government oversight to self-administered safety programs, which many of us had. We all had safety programs, or many did, but this was a formal, structured method of looking at safety from a risk point of view and a risk mitigation goal, setting goals, being able to achieve them, measuring them, knowing whether you were safe or not just getting lucky, because many people would say, I'm safe, I haven't had an accident, but there was no proof that they weren't just lucky. Now we have the ISBA doing the same thing in ground handling, enabling an ISBAO operator to be able to look at the FBO, the airport that they're going to, and know that they have a a similar program, in fact, identical in its underpinnings, that they can depend on with their ground handling service provider. From the beginning to now, clearly the need was present even in 1981, because otherwise the founding associations wouldn't have developed a council that could represent them at ICAO. But clearly the need is for an organization that's recognized by the global authority, or the, not authority, but the global organizing body under ICAO, as a voice. No individual national association has the authority or the recognition to represent. So we have this opportunity to go and talk about many issues to do with airspace access, airports access, to do with rulemaking, even to some degree on the financial side, to help people understand the consequences of limiting business aviation to their economy. So I think we can see many areas in which there have been victories, but I can point to a number that have been really significant in the last number of years. I think certainly CORSIA and the ability of IBAC to be a part and a leader in the sustainable aviation fuel project. We were the sort of the face of that project at the beginning, and that was a really nice opportunity. Victories that IBAC has had in the last while, it's less a victory than an honor, is that ICAO recognizes IBAC as an honest broker, the organization which will seek to benefit everyone. Certainly we have our remit, and we will argue on behalf of business aviation if we see ourselves being disadvantaged, but we do not seek to disadvantage others. And so we're seen as the organization that can be trusted to do what's right for everybody, I think. That's certainly the impression we have, and ICAO has referred to us that way. And that wasn't particularly applicable when they asked us to help them with the public health corridor IPAC, or implementation pack development, particularly on a training program that they needed for the regulators, so that regulators could be trained on how to develop policy and procedures that would allow the public health corridor to be implemented in their nation. But the people who I've worked with really have left an impression on me that makes me honored to be part of the organization, to recognize that the work that we do is something that most flight departments, most pilots, certainly, and maintenance people, and even many aviation managers would have no idea what IBAC is doing for them, because the work is done 5, 8, 10 years ahead of the effect, sometimes the effect on the operation. It can take that much lead time for something to filter through the standards and recommended practices at ICAO down to a nation, which then writes rules based on those SARPs and affects the operator. And they have no idea that what we're doing is representing them. And it's Kurt and the team of people who argue for us at Customs, Terry, who's taking care of customs work for us tirelessly, and the environmental panels that have been argued for us or been represented, we've been represented in for years. We just wouldn't be here had it not been for so many very, very capable people. So we're very well served as an industry, and I think people need to know about them. I look back at the history. Mac McNichol, my mentor, who was one of the originating board members, knew Bill Stein very well. Bill was still serving with IBAC on behalf of NBAA. He was our secretary and had been for all that time. And I'm sure Bill will be one of the people interviewed here. I have always enjoyed him greatly. Bill and Peter Ingleton always greeted me at any association, anytime I saw them. Peter Ingleton, I never understood who he was at the beginning. I knew who Bill was because Mac introduced us and Peter was introduced to me, but he was just always this very friendly, tall Australian gentleman with the hat on. And yet Peter served us so well at the ICAO headquarters in Montreal. And we've had people who've come on. Of course, Mike Holm came for a time. We lost Mike due to cancer, and now we're very fortunate to have Andy there working with us. We've had people serving, stepping in to serve, as I said, for leadership. Doug Carr stepped in between Mike and Andy and did double duty on behalf of NBAA and IBAC. and we all owe him a great debt of thanks. So these are people that I've been very honored to be getting to know in terms of the industry professionally, but also personally. And it's a really amazing organization. I've been involved in a number of boards and operations and volunteer organizations, and this is the most extraordinary one I think I've ever been on.
I am so honored to chair the Governor Board of IBAC during its 40th anniversary. Congratulations, IBAC. Thank you, our colleague, member association, industry partner, operator as affiliate. Thank you. I look forward to work with you all.
Thank you to the member associations whose support over the years has allowed IBAC to grow and to thrive. And thank you to the member associations leaders and executives and the representatives to the governing board who have been so generous of their time in guiding us and advising us. Thank you especially to the leaders who have gone before us, who put IBAC on a foundation on which now we're able to build. And of course, I want to acknowledge and thank the current staff of IBAC, who are a committed team of professionals who are helping to promote excellence and promote the industry at a global level. Thank you.